So a little while back, I ran across this Mr. Ballin video about the ghosts of Flight 401. And this has just stuck in my mind. I can't let this story go. It's so interesting. So I'm going to kind of get into a little bit of the background of what happened, and then move on to why is this so fascinating, because there is a whole bunch of stories that unfolded much later after this plane crashed. So this is really, really interesting. And then toward the end, I'll put up my own I did a little sketch of my own remote viewing session when I looked in at the energy of this, just to see what I could check out about the ghosts or energies that are hanging around. So lots of twists and turns to this video, so stay tuned to the end. So what happened with this flight? So this is a little bit of the backstory. This was an Eastern Airlines flight. It was scheduled to fly from New York JFK to Miami. This happened on December 29th, 1972. They were in a Lockheed TriStar plane. The crash happened. They crashed into the Florida Everglades. There were 101 total fatalities, 4 cockpit crew members. 2 of the 10 flight attendants died. 96 of the 163 passengers were killed. So 75 people died or survived. 75 people survived. So the gist of what happened is that they got out close to the Miami airport, and when they went to put the landing gear down, it sounded like it went down, but the light was indicating that it was not down. So they did a fly around. They bypassed the Miami airport and let them know we're going to fly out over the Everglades while we sort out our technical issues. So that's what they did. They were out over the Everglades trying to figure out, I guess they were really focused on this light. And I think there were like 4 flight crew up there working on trying to figure out, was it an electrical problem? Was it the light bulb? And they sent one of the guys down underneath in the compartment to go and look to see if he could see if the landing gear was down. Well, somehow in that, they theorize that the autopilot got turned off and none of them realized it, and they had been losing altitude this whole time while they were out there over the Everglades. And by the time they realized it, like they were crashing, literally, like they were at like 900 feet. And when Mr. Ballin's telling the story, he talks about 2 fishermen were out there in the Everglades at night, and they saw the plane crash, and they were the first ones on the scene. So if you want a rundown of all that, definitely check out the Mr. Ballin video. Plus, he tells the ghost part of the story way, way better than I'm going to tell it. He is so good. If you have not seen any Mr. Ballin videos, you do not want to miss this one. Okay, so now for the part of the story. So why could I not let this go? Like I've been thinking about this story for weeks. It's so interesting to me. So what unfolded after this horrible plane crash? People that survived were, some of them some of them had survived the crash, and then they drowned because they were in shallow water in the Everglades, stuck in their seats, and that, a lot of them had lost consciousness. I mean, this was a horrendous plane crash. Um, there was a woman who had a baby. I guess there were both the parents died in the plane crash, so they found the baby. Just all kinds of um, stories that I've sort of run across looking into this. Some of them were in that original Mr. Ballin video, and then some other ones I learned about as I kind of dug into this a little bit more. So what happened was, after the plane crash, Eastern Airlines repurposed some of the parts from the crashed airplane and used them on other airplanes in their fleet. And this went on for a number of years. There were all of these documented dozens and dozens of ghost encounters on different planes. People were seeing the pilot, he'd be sitting in a seat on their flight. They saw the engineer's face. There were two flight attendants that died. So the flight attendants on other flights were encountering these ghosts. It was terrifying people. There were passengers that were seeing like this ghost pilot sitting next to them. I mean, people were freaking out, completely freaking out about it. So I find that part, to me, there's other more fascinating things about this story as it kind of more details of it unfold. But the idea that the parts from that plane could carry so much energy of this event, that these ghosts encounters just continue to unfold, it makes me think about just the psychometry of objects, and that these patterns can just be imprinted on them. And I guess there was a lot of people that said that the engineer felt would have been a person that felt a lot of guilt or responsibility for what had happened on the plane. And so there's a lot of other unfolding details around that. And a lot of times that's who people, I guess, would be this engineer guy. So yeah, that's the part that sticks in my head. Like, just to think about the imprints on places and on objects and the parts of the plane. So ultimately, this happened over and over and over. There's a lady who wrote a book. I have not read it, but I'll try to put an image of that up at the end. And eventually, Eastern Airlines kept trying to cover this up and cover this up. People working on the flights, they would report it, and then those pages of the logbook would just be torn out and missing. And eventually they had to go back and take all these parts off of these planes to stop these things from happening, these ghost encounters, these things. Like, one woman saw like some like mist come out from underneath where this like luggage part of, I don't know, she was a flight attendant who was working. It was like where you stash their own luggage back there where they work. And all this mist came out and kind of took this form and then instantly disappeared. all kinds of crazy stories. So the only way they could get this to stop was to take these parts off of these planes. So last night I dug into this a little bit further. I went and watched an episode of The Ghosts of Flight 401 on Amazon Prime. And it's a ghost hunter type of a show, and they've got a clairvoyant on there doing some intuitive reading of the site, and then they've got a guy out there with all the different instruments and everything, seeing if they can communicate with who's there. So I usually sort of take these things with a grain of salt, but I wanted to see if there were any hits on what I picked up on my remote viewing sessions. So there were some interesting things. I'll get to that in the next slide. But some of the things that they were talking about is, well, first, the very first impressions were of this screaming woman searching for her baby. So that was a fair bit of the initial impressions. And then there was the guy who felt really responsible for the crash of the plane, and they believe that guy to be the engineer. I think that's what they were calling him, the engineer. So those things were all really interesting. And then they started talking about that this site where the plane went down is on like Miami. Basically that whole area right there is the start, it's the corner of the Bermuda Triangle, and other planes have gone down in this same area, one of them within a mile of that plane crash. There was a plane that went down and sunk completely into the mud. So that is really interesting. And then there's also that the Coral Castle where all those monolithic stones are carved. That is really near where this plane went down. So they kind of, it's just sort of to me, kind of an interesting aside. I'm not sure that really factors into the plane crash. Like they seem to be saying that there were all kinds of energies in that Coral Castle area that could have contributed to malfunctions in the plane. This seems like a no for me in my mind. Like you're big time reaching here, but I do think it is interesting that place is so close by. I've always sort of found that fascinating that guy carved all those statues there. So, but okay, so of that part aside, the other thing I found really interesting in the show was they brought on this woman who wrote this book, Elizabeth Fuller. Like I said, I have not read it, but she was a flight attendant who survived that crash. I'm pretty sure that was her. Or no, maybe that wasn't the author of the book. I think that was someone else they were interviewing on the show. It was a woman they were interviewing on the show. Survived the crash, and she was one of the 10 flight attendants. And she had taken a photo of all of the flight attendants together. They were kind of goofing off. She had like her camera in her suitcase, and they were sort of goofing around taking a series of different photos of themselves. These are the last known photos of these flight attendants, literally before the plane crashed. And when they're goofing around, the one of them was making little devil horns behind one of the girls, and at the other side of the photo, someone was kind of pretending to play around and choke one of the other girls. And it was just sort of like they were just, kind of funning around. Well, those two women in the photos, the play choking and the play devil horns, they were the two flight attendants that died in the plane crash, like literally within, an hour or two of when this photo was taken, maybe less. I thought that was fascinating. All kinds of really interesting things. So now we're going to move on to what did I find when I looked at the energy. Okay, so maybe one or two of you who watch my videos might have heard me talk about that I've trained with Deborah Lynn Katz. She's the head of the remote viewing society here in the United States. So I have trained, done some clairvoyant training for a couple of years, and links to all the trainings that I've done are on my website. So I use a combination of techniques to look at the energy, and just sort of, I did a very short session because there's a lot of front loading. Like, I already know the story. So that's going to shape what I'm likely to find when I go to look at the energy. So I find this guy that I interpreted to be the pilot, someone who felt very responsible for the crash. So I did find that guy. I'm also always looking for stuck energies that may need help crossing over. That's just sort of a side part of the project. And I did I did initially, when I tuned in, there was a lot of like confusion, maybe some screaming, but I never really honed in on like a screaming woman with a lost baby. So I did not see that. Um, the most interesting thing was I saw the backs of all of these heads of all of these people that were sunk and trapped in the mud. And that may have been the plane that sunk in literally right in that same area that they were talking about. There was a plane that crashed that sunk right into the mud within a mile of that. So I did see all of those stuck people in the mud and worked with that energy a little bit. So that was probably the most interesting part of what I got from looking at the energy. I will post this sketch that I did up on my blog, and lots of other videos coming up. So yeah, stay tuned. There's more to come.